All right, guys, I'm going to kick it off. So first of all, my name is Tal. I'm a development practice manager at SEEK. I've got my colleagues Ben and Brian here to help me later with the discussion. Basically, I want to talk about prioritizing technology and for non-technical stakeholders. Now, that sounds like a big subject. Basically, what it comes down to is the experience of me going to the car mechanic. I go to the car mechanic and I put my car in and I get a quote that's very detailed and has a lot of line items on it. The unfortunate problem is because of the knowledge gap, I understand exactly none of those line items. I don't know whether the costs that I'm going to be paying for them are any good, and I don't know whether to prioritize them and pick just the one thing that will make my car go better for a little while longer. This is basically the experience that a lot of non-technical stakeholders or members of our team have every time dealing with what technical guys in the team are suggesting. So this talk is basically around trying to close that knowledge gap, creating a kind of a common language around technical tasks, technical improvements, continuous improvement projects that will allow both the techies and non-techies to speak together and live all together in harmony. So, aren't those mechanics trustworthy, by the way? And that's the other part. When you don't understand what you're buying, you tend to feel like you're being hacked. So having a discussion in which you can have a meaningful conversation makes it a lot more, builds trust instead of eroding it. So, talking about harmony and everyone living happily ever after. Stories have been long used as a tool to teach the next generation good behaviors and habits. And basically, stories are full of metaphors of real life that allow you to teach your kids how to be good, how to not screw over strangers, how not to talk to old guys with candy with vans that have tinted windows. But those metaphors on their own can be augmented because one of the strongest kind of metaphor is a visual metaphor. So a visual metaphor is used extensively in advertising, for example, to get really quickly to the point because it conveys an idea really, really succinctly in one image. Now, about 65% of the population are visual learners, and 30% of the population are auditory learners. So a story that combines or is based on a visual metaphor is one that will be able to address 95% of the population. So I believe it's very effective. So this is time for a story. Now this is a subset of a larger story that I used at SEEK, and some of it has been changed to protect the guilty, and also to protect some of our intellectual property. So this story starts with this crazy guy, Uli Steck. He is an alpinist, and what I mean by that is that this crazy guy climbs absolutely sheer icy rocks with no climbing ropes and no safety equipment whatsoever. He managed to break the world record for climbing the north face of the Eiger. I don't know, my computer stopped working. So the north face of the Eiger is 1,800 meters of sheer icy rock. He managed to do it in under 3 hours, or 2 hours and 47 minutes to be exact. Now, just for perspective, the first time that was successfully attempted, and even since about 64 people have died trying to climb this, it was done by a whole team of international climbers. And that team took 3 days to finish this climb. Now, 3 days versus 3 hours. Why does one climber able to climb this thing in so much quicker than a team can? So for one, he's completely free to take risks on his own. He doesn't need climbing ropes. He can also respond to the changes in the path really, really quickly. He sees a roadblock, he changes his direction to change it. He doesn't need to consult with anyone else or communicate with anyone else to do it. He can also use the best possible tools for the job. The best climbing axe, the best climbing equipment. Also, he himself is the most well-oiled climbing machine you would ever see. So compare that to a group of climbers, all tied together in ropes. Their success is either they succeed together or they fail together. Every change in the terrain that they need to react to, they need to communicate, sometimes across difficult environments, difficult weather, shouting each other across in the fog. So let's have just a quick theoretical talk about why four independent climbers are better than four climbers that are tied together. Say, just for the sake of this discussion, that 1 in 4 of those climbers is going to fall to their death. Unfortunate. So that means there's a 3 in 4 chance of these climbers making it to the top. So if they climb independently, essentially there's a 75% success rate at the end of the climb. All right, this is a bit heartless to say, but this is true. Whereas if they're all tied together and they can only succeed together, or they fail together, there's actually only a 31% chance that they all make it to the top. That's a massive difference. 75% success versus 31% success. So as managers, if we're thinking about managing risk, independence is a very, very strong ability to manage risk. So often in any software organization, this is what we are. We are essentially climbers tied together. The ropes that tie us together are shared resources, shared environments, the code that we share, process. And the thing is that in big organizations, not only are we as a team tied together in a rope, we're actually a team of teams tied together in a rope. So think of the last time you had to queue up to get to a performance environment or to a staging environment just to get your code out to production. Now, the unfortunate thing is that this is the underlying root cause for some of the trust issue techies versus non-techies have. Because you go to your product guys and they want to build more features and you tell them, we can't do that. So they said, because you said, we don't have enough capacity to do that. So they say, how about you add some more? The problem is, as you can see, that adding more people to this climb is not going to make this climb faster at all. Instead, it adds to the communications overhead. It adds to the tangle. So So this is part of the problem, but the thing is that the problem doesn't end here. Often, as software teams, we're also carrying this sack of rocks on our back. Every time we have to cut a corner because we need to make a trade-off, we take that corner and we shove it promptly down the back of our rucksack. And not only that, is that we often are forced to climb with really dull, really old climbing axes. So if this is, say, technical debt that we carry, or refactorings that we need to do that we haven't done, or corners that we had to cut because of valid business reasons, this, for example, is the old tools that we have. For example, using an old version control system, using old physical environments that are really slow, etc. So this is the problem. The thing is, on the business side of things, to break the climbing metaphor for 1 second, this is how management sees our teams. We are a bunch of teams all operating independently, riding right into delivering into the sunset. The problem is that this is what we actually are. We're a bunch of trains trapped in a gridlock, much like the Melbourne metropolitan system. And to be able to actually deliver as those, we need to actually break all those dependencies. So starting to talk about solutions, when you present those problems to product owners, the immediate reaction for them is, so you said you're using a dull climbing axe. How about we replace your dull climbing axe with this fancy new shining grappling gun, all right? This new build server or this new version control system. The problem with a shiny grappling gun that theoretically you can fire at the top of the mountain and it will pull you right up there is that unless you deal with the other things, those problems are, pun intended, tied together. You essentially, unless you start emptying your sack of rocks and deal with the other problems, so empty your sack of rocks and especially cut your dependencies, that grappling gun will not be able to help you at all. Okay? Got that? The end. No, it's not really the end. This is only part of a bigger presentation. But the idea here is using this visual metaphor in the form of a story allows you to create a common language. So imagine being able to use this common language to talk to your product owners, or for your product owners to actually come and, when they do, say, a walkthrough, and have a look at the technical tasks. Say you have 2 technical tasks of about equal effort, and they now can ask you the question of, is this going to cut our dependencies to the other teams, or is this something that's about replacing our tools? Suddenly they have a meaningful conversation that they can have with you, which, for example, in most cases, if you have a technical task that's about cutting your dependencies, I personally would pick that one as far as the business is concerned. But not always can you do it. Sometimes you have to say, all right, to be able to cut the dependencies, we first need to fix our tools. But this immediately creates that conversation. And that conversation, instead of being something that the product owners are wary of and never just rely on blind trust, which is easily erodable, they're able to actually participate. This makes it so much easier to have those conversations and actually allow you to get some traction around getting some of these issues addressed. So basically, seeding this, I wanted to give some examples just to make sure the ideas are clear, and this is how you can also use that to communicate with your product owners. Say you have a type of refactoring, then this is about emptying your stack of rocks. A new dev tool is about a new shiny grappling gun. Cloud deployments, for example, because they bring the operations to be owned by the team, are both about cutting the dependencies, but also about newer, faster tools. A microservice architecture is usually about clearing the stack of rocks that you had before, and also about cutting your dependencies, allowing your teams to release independently of each other. Similar with process changes like having DevOps or no ops or ops in the team. It's really about cutting your dependencies. And this gives a really good basis for communications with business stakeholders. So the next part of this talk, as promised, is really a discussion. And this is where I want to call upon you guys to talk a little bit about your experience with trying to negotiate with business around technical improvement and how it went, and also whether you think something like that would help. So I'm going to start with Brian. So let me come up. So Brian is a delivery manager at Seek. He runs the engineering stream. So the engineering stream sometimes behind closed doors is called the tech debt stream, unfortunately. But so Brian experienced this kind of negotiation basically, I would say, regularly, daily, if not more often.
Yep.
And I would love to ask you a question. What's the biggest challenge you face when actually trying to negotiate with product around technical debt?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest challenge would be trying to get them to care. And actually, I'll be a bit cheeky because we've probably got some people that have this job in the room. But being an in-house IT department, a tip I recently learned off John Eves was you almost need to frame the conversation as, I'm here to make this company shitloads of money. And that's what I want to do. I want to help you make crap loads of money. I'm not here to, create poetry in C# or anything like that. I'm here to make you a lot of money. So framing the conversation in that context, because you are up against, as an internal IT department, you're up against salespeople from external providers that are prepared to take the product manager to lunch and say, don't listen to those guys. I'll do it for you in half that time. So that's one of the big challenges. And always remembering to really frame the start of the conversation as, this is about making lots of money. This is about helping the company make lots of money. You're here to do that, I'm here to do that. That's what we want to do, and doing it together. So,
Awesome. Yeah.
But I can talk about this for on and on and on, so that's why I'm deliberately stopping myself. So.
Ben, what has been your perspective?
It's been a little bit different in the companies that I've worked at. But yeah, I suppose going back to Census and even ANZ days, it was always a battle to get the product owner or the business owner to really understand why we should focus on tech debt and technical initiatives. Just trying to, I suppose, put it in terms that they can understand in terms of if we don't do it, here's the impact in terms of speed to delivery or velocity or whatever it might be. So going back to Brian's point, we're all here to have success and make money. So just putting it in those terms can really help. But yeah, I haven't seen it done well, to be honest. So yeah.
The key for me in the successful pitches I've made is drawing a very strong link to where the product wants to go. Knowing where that product roadmap is, what they're likely to want in 6 months, and basically pointing out to them, if you don't let me start on this, it's not going to happen. So,
Is anyone here from an organization that's carrying a lot of technical debt? Everyone. All right. Is anyone here from an organization that's not a startup that just started that has successfully dealt with technical debt? Okay. All right. So Brian was talking about the positive incentive side of things. I think that's very important to have that conversation around this is how we're going to save you dollars, or this is how we're going to make you bucket loads of dollars. But the other aspect of it, and that's the red flag, is very important, and the social proof. So this is where another story comes in. And when I did this the presentation, that this is extracted to Seek. One of the things I brought up was this product manager called Marty Kagan. So first of all, Marty is essentially wrote the book on product management. It's called Inspired, and he was formerly the VP of product at eBay, VP of product at AOL, VP of product at Netscape, and he was really high up at HP. And one of the chapters in his book, he talks about the experiences that he has had with technical bankruptcy. And this is not from the perspective of a developer going, oh, damn it, I had to deal with shit code. This is from the perspective of a product owner that has had to essentially, in one of those examples, spend 2 years not delivering any new value for his customers. Imagine how frustrating that is for a product owner. So he speaks the two, I'll do it very short to keep the time, but he speaks on two experiences. One is Netscape. So Netscape, for 2 years, couldn't deliver on top of Netscape Navigator, and that essentially ended up killing the company. It doesn't exist anymore as is. It became Mozilla, the foundation, releasing Firefox, but as a company, it no longer exists, i.e. completely, Internet Explorer completely blew them out of the market.
What was the book called, sorry?
Inspired. And the subtitle is How to Create Products People Love. The other example was eBay, in which for a year and a half, the techies came up to him and said, we can't deliver any new features, we have to rewrite. So for a year and a half, they essentially rewrote the system. Meanwhile, Amazon was making headway with their user marketplace. And essentially, they're very, very close to losing their place in the market. So after, but in the nick of time, they managed to release a new version, and they still managed to compete. Amazon still took a big chunk of their existing market share. And so after that, Marty essentially decided, I'm never, ever going to experience this again. And he said, I don't even care what my techies tell me. I'm going to make sure there is dedicated capacity that's enough to deal with all these things. So he pegs it at about 20% capacity, and says that in some code bases, that would be 30, 35, and more. Now, I'm telling you this story the same way that I was telling the product manager's story, because that social proof is very helpful in selling the idea of built-in capacity, because that's something that product owners really, really hate, because for them, it's less ability to deliver new product, and that's understandable. But the explaining it through both the promise, we'll be able to deliver a lot faster if we cut all those dependencies and empty the sack of rocks and fix our tools, but also with the red flag. Unless we do this, we're going to fall off the mountain, basically. Come on, guys, give me some questions.
So I think like that social proof stuff's really good, like talking about Netscape and other companies, but what I find really, really effective is social proof within the company. So whenever something goes really bad or takes months to do or hits budget problems, I just think, remember it. And the next time there's a discussion about it, you bring it up, like your history within the company. Remember that thing that took ages to do.
Yeah.
If this was different, that might have taken half the time.
You need a phrase or industry term. Something like the golden rules, sustainable software development. Something like that, a jingle that you can sell.
It's true.
Remember your
There
pain.
is quality. They always can argue with quality. If the stakeholders are seeing, okay, we have to get this new testing tool and we do everything automated and it costs us $100,000, whatever. And they see the quality is improving and they always say the green traffic lights of the production system.
Yeah.
You can say, okay, we invested this amount of money and you get a better quality.
Yeah, but quality on its own is not enough, because sometimes time to market is more important. That trade-offs are valid. They happen in the industry. You need to make business trade-offs. The problem is that you have to have the conversation about it rather than be the default. In too many organizations, the default is cut corners without even discussion. So part of the reason for this language is to make sure that that discussion happens. Because when sometimes, as a technical person, it's quite difficult to articulate why a decision is going to cost us in the long term. But if you can explain it, that this is going to tie us to the other teams, for example, and we won't be able to release without them, or this will tie us to another service that we don't know whether it will work or not. It gives you the language to do that. And that goes for both parts. If sometimes I myself suffer from this, that I have the tendency to want to gold plate my technical, my code. Sometimes that's not necessary. So for the product owner to be able to ask me the right questions makes me think about it. Am I doing that? Or am I actually emptying the sack of rocks? Or am I actually cutting those dependencies. So, and what Brent said about the social proof internally, I think that if you are able to draw that back, do a retrospective of why that didn't work and tie it back to this common language, it also reinforces it. Then you had a question.
So I think all said sort of very useful, and the idea of saying sort of 10-20% to try and tackle technical debt. One metaphor with the car mechanic you had right at the start, if you don't know what your car mechanic's saying, he's just doing stuff and charging you money. I had a car mechanic I could trust, which is pretty rare. But there was this level of trust between us that he would do work on my car. It didn't feel like too much, didn't feel too little, it was just right. Didn't really understand what he did, but he assured me this was the right level of extra refactoring, if you will, to keep my car up and running. I guess shouldn't the product owner to a certain degree just have a certain amount of trust in his team that they'll just get on and do some stuff, and they don't need to come and ask permission every time they want to tackle something, unless it's something huge. They're raising about 20% to 40%, 50% for a couple of iterations, and then you need to have this discussion.
I guess the question is how you build that trust, because I think that's what a lot of organizations lack. Big gap.
True.
Exactly, and this is where you want to build that trust and prevent situations like adding more developers and not being able to articulate why that is actually making you slower.
Yeah.
Because that erodes the trust almost immediately. Because the business is throwing in more money, but they're not getting anything in return. And you need to at least explain to them why that's not the right thing to do, or at least why that was the case.
I think at the same time we have to give the positive reinforcements as well of what teams do certain times, how people think, and how they've helped back, and so that other than the things that have fallen apart, you're saying this is what we did right.
Selling things positively always works better as well.
And even if you've got that trust built with the product owner, they still have to get that message up to the senior level, right? So that's where this language comes in.
Yeah, I think one of the, I don't claim to have solved technical debt anywhere I've ever worked, but if I've had any success, it's been about trying to frame it positively, not like we need to stop development so we can fix this problem. We are desperately trying to say yes more often to you, and the more the development team can understand the roadmap and understand even long, because I've never seen a case where the technical debt repayment is less than the next feature. It's always easy to deliver that next feature over doing the technical debt, but if you can frame it in the larger picture of these things you want to do for the next year, we're going to struggle to say yes to that, we're going to struggle to say yes to that, we're going to struggle to say yes to that, and we want to say yes to all those things. There's got to be a longer term picture.
I think that, to your point before, you said tie it back to the vision of where you're going.
Yeah, this is very true.
That's the killer. When they go, well, we do this, and then the next day it takes 20% more. The one after that takes 20% more than what you thought, and it just slowly gets bigger and bigger.
Is there a way to measure and report on technical debt, just like there is other operational costs, how much you're going to make in the next quarter, and how much technical debt you've got in your product? That would be a good way to measure and report back to business so they can see the investment cost.
So a couple of points around that. This is something that we're experimenting with. Do you want to talk about that?
So I think it depends on the organisation a lot. Seek is very growth focused and not so cost focused as opposed to other organisations I've worked in. So as a company, we don't measure costs particularly well. So it's actually very hard to measure the operating cost. Everyone knows it's there anecdotally, but it's quite hard to get that measure. But we are experimenting with other ways just simply by having specific coloured cards.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. First of all, there's if you measure cycle time, I would suggest using, say, different colors for different days. That, for example, if you spend a lot of time waiting behind another team for an environment, that's one color. Just use a different color marker, and then overall you can collect information about where you're spending your cycle time, and that can help you make those decisions. Another aspect, and that was Brian mentioned, is that sometimes it's also about surfacing the problem to the business. So we're experimenting with using black index cards for technical debt, because when product owners come on their world tour and they see all this black, it kind of draws their attention. And it's very, very easy to fall into a case in which you have all kinds of various color cards and you lose that value, but black is a very strong color.
It's hard to find white markers, but they look really fun.
It's also sometimes hard to find the black index cards. Officeworks do carry them occasionally. The other technique is using we don't call it technical debt anymore, by the way, either delivery risk or cost of delay. Cost of delay is especially useful because it allows you to use the same term when you're talking about business value. What is the cost of delay of not delivering this feature versus cost of delay how long it will take us to delay how much will this delay us from delivering? And the other, and a technique to visualize that is having what was previously called a tech debt balloon. Essentially, the problem with tech debt is it constantly grows. So unless you show that, they won't drive different behavior. So having essentially just a butcher's paper with a balloon that's around the estimate of what it take you to deal with your current technical debt, really rough estimate, just make it grow. Because it's really easy to explain that when you have a really bad line of code and you write a perfectly beautiful line of code on top of that, there's still 2 lines of code that you need to replace to fix the first one. So that tech debt actually grows, and you just need to make it visual. So when you have your stakeholders come in for a tour, if they face with reality, and that also helps change the behavioral patterns. Basically, decision making. To be able to be good decision making, you have to be able to see what the dashboard is saying. Unless you have some visibility of that and some understanding of what it means, you won't be able to make good decisions. Kuta.
Is there any notion of tech debt and staff retention?
Say that again.
Staff retention.
Around happiness. Yeah. Absolutely. There's a very strong correlation between how much technical debt you have and staff happiness, developer happiness, for example. This is very true about the tools as well. All tools, and we're suffering from that right now. All tools cause developer unhappiness and therefore churn, etc. So this is another. It's very helpful to be able to sell projects like that to the business. So that.
A couple of things. One is I run a startup. One of the things I'm doing is there's no tech debt, like you say, before it's millions to the enterprise thing. But I guess one of these things that we're trying to do is just making sure that they don't get to the tech debt. The way that we do that with the story cards, next to people actually helping us with that is actually, like you say, having like a black cards and cards are there, but we just make sure that there are only so many points that are allowed to be associated with devs. Now, they'll say that's all we'll get through. They've got in the back of the mind that they actually reserve 4 or 5 points to constantly attack the tech debt, so that we hopefully don't get into that position. But it's much harder when you get into the enterprise side of things. I'm actually probably more interested in asking the question, have you ever tried doing the whole project unicorn and gone, well, if the tech debt balloon is so big, that we'll just build another one over here, but the system just works nicely, and move to that later.
So this is kind of our tech bankruptcy, and we had exactly that happen at SIG. The problem is that it took about 2 years to deliver. So for 2 years, there were some customers of ours that didn't see a single new feature and they're quite irate. Some of them were very vocal. So I think that that is one solution. It's not the solution that you want to get to. You want to alleviate that problem before it happens.
And I think it's dangerous for me.
Yeah.
Because
But it's a fun.
like coming from MYOB, people will go, I've got this old product, I've got the new product, and it'll be exactly like the old one, won't it? You're like, hang on. Now we've got 20 yees of development, and you're going to do it in how long?
Yeah.
And you're almost painting yourself into a corner right at the start. And I think that's, to the point, you want to try and avoid that, because that is a really hard spot.
So Joel Spolsky has a very good blog article around why rewrites are bad, and basically he reckons that it takes 10 years to get good software, as in understanding really and adapting to the business value of your customer. So if you're throwing that away, essentially, and rewriting, then you're going to miss out on that. And especially big mistake is rewriting to where you were before rather than to what your customers want now. Because by the time you finish, it's not the same.
You're maintaining 2 systems during that time as well. And then you've got the customer migration to deal with as well. So.
One last question, because we're running out of time.
Are we?
Yeah.
So we've got a fair bit of tech debt in our team, but one of the problems we face is every time we try and pitch it, new features come in, and despite the fact that we explained that it will take us longer to deliver that feature because of the tech debt, they say, yeah, that's fine, we'll fix it later. But later never comes.
Yeah.
Never work out how to attack
This is especially why you need these tools for that dialogue. The goal of this was to get the product owners coming in and asking us, what tech debt did you deal with today? And it was, well, it's very early days, but it was slightly successful in that respect. We need to increase that. And all these tools act in unison. This talk was originally specifically around creating that common language, but obviously this is essentially the core of what building software is in the long term.
And there's a really good blog post by a guy called Rankin on Medium, and he talks about the tech debt analogy. And I was getting uncomfortable with the term because every legacy code base, every bad code is being called tech debt. And he points out that analogy is actually you making the choice to get a product early and go into debt that you're going to pay back later. And he calls out that most of us experience what you're experiencing, where someone goes, yeah, fine, because they don't actually comprehend the debt that they're going into to get it. Yes. And then a legacy code base is like going up to a US citizen and asking them to pay the US trillion debt. So, yeah. So it's a really good article.
It's a classic case of putting things under the carpet.
Maiz, he's Israeli, so I don't know how to pronounce it properly, and I think the last name is Lulkin. Come and see me, I'll bring it up.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate your time.